On today's show, Houston Rockets injury updates headed into Wednesday night's matchup against the Portland Trailblazers, getting some key contributors back to the lineup. Thank goodness. Also, the Houston Rockets reportedly committed to finding a role for Jalen Green on a winning team. We're going to unpack what that statement means, plus a couple key guards the Rockets could take a look at ahead of the NBA trade deadline. Malcolm Brogdon and D'Angelo Russell. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
Throw it up to Jalen Green.
Sengun here in the short row. Oh my, that's the no look.
Jabari for three and the win. Yeah!
Look at Tari Eason.
Here comes Tari.
No!
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
The Houston Rockets select Thompson and Cam Whitmore.
One thing I have never done is not made the playoffs, and so we want to take that step here as well.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. Free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe. Drop your thoughts in the YouTube comments. The best way you can help out the show. Now, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for being an everydayer and making the show part of your day every single day. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, none other than the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line podcast, Ben DuBose, rocking the Dunksternaut shirt. I'm very jealous of that, Ben. I need some Dunksternaut swag in my closet. I have yet to purchase any of it, but I need some at some point. Here, because we got some stuff to break down on today's show. We got some roster kind of updates, some of the injury updates coming out of Houston Rockets practice ahead of their matchup with the Portland Trailblazers. Plus, we'll tackle some of the reporting and rumors around this team, a couple more names to monitor as we're approaching the NBA trade deadline. Malcolm Brogdon and D'Angelo Russell, a couple of potential fits for this Houston Rockets team, as well as the Rockets and their reported commitment to Jalen Green. We're going to get to that part in just a second, but let's get these updates out of the way here really quick, Ben, just because, some quick hitting stuff here. Jabari Smith Jr., Fred VanVleet, and Jeff Green all practiced with the Rockets on Tuesday afternoon. So Ime Udoka believes that they should all be available for the game against the Blazers. So it'll be nice to have all those guys back in the lineup. Tari Eason participated in part of practice. So he might not be on the same ramp as John Wall, Ben, but Tari is on a ramp, and at least that ramp is leading somewhere, it looks like.
Yeah, it's really good to see Tari out there, period. We hope it's not the John Wall ramp, but to see him out there for even part of practice, it's the most work he's done in a team capacity in some while. I think it's clear now that he had a full-blown recurrence of the stress reaction that he had in the preseason, or at least something close to that. So I think they're trying to err on the side of caution and at least give him the amount of time he had off the first time, which is a month, if not a little bit more. He first went out in early January, so my guess is as the calendar turns to February, and that's a little over a week away, is when it starts getting realistic to bring him back. And even when he does come back, I think on a minutes limitation. As far as the other three, yeah, I think it's pretty encouraging. I'm less concerned about Jabari simply because it's a recurrence of what we already knew, which is that left ankle. When a guy has loose ligaments after suffering a sprain, it's never going to fully go away until they have an extended period of rest, maybe over the All-Star break, but more likely not until the offseason. It's just something nagging that he's going to have to deal with, be it high tops, a brace, tape, whatever you want to do. It's always going to be there. And Jabari is not the type of guy who's super explosive anyway. It's not like a quick twitch guard who really needs to push off on that ankle all the time. So I think that that's something that's always going to be in the back of his mind. But honestly, Jabari can give you a lot of quality minutes, even if he's a little bit limited by that ankle. And so I think it's an issue of pain tolerance, and the Rockets and Jabari, they have an understanding of how this can work. And keep in mind, it largely had worked for the couple of weeks that it's been since he first sprained it. So I don't see any reason to be too despondent over just what looked like a minor role at the end of the Utah game, give him a day off, which he had against the Celtics, and a couple of days off after that with the schedule, and bring him back against the Portland Trailblazers on Wednesday night. Fred VanVleet in the back is the one that I'm monitoring closely, just because it did date back to the road trip. We saw what appeared to be a link between the back injury and his performances. Fred acknowledged that at practice today, said it affected his shooting, and also because the Rockets rely so much on Fred. Really, he and Alperen Sengun are the foundation of this team. We know how many minutes he has to play, and back injuries are no joke. They can linger. I looked it up. He has had some back issues in the past, none major, but it's not like this is out of nowhere. So I will be sort of keeping a watchful eye on that. The other two injuries, Jabari, again, the ankle, we sort of already knew it's going to be in the background as long as it's not made worse. I think they believe he can play through it, and he largely has. Jeff Green, the role is small enough to where you can easily keep him at 15 minutes per game. You can keep any nagging issue in check. Fred is the one, between back injuries being something that's tough to fully kick and what the Rockets expect out of Fred, that's one that I'm going to be keeping a watchful eye on. Hopefully giving him 3 days off between Saturday's game and not playing again until Wednesday is enough, but it's something to just sort of keep your eyes peeled for moving forward. Is he moving well? Is he shooting well? Hopefully this is enough, but time will tell.
Yeah, it reminds me of this conversation that I had with a former assistant coach, just talking about the fact that the NBA is about, there's something that fans have to understand when it comes to, injuries or quote unquote injuries with players. Is the NBA season is a long 82 game slog, right? You got to get through a grueling schedule. Almost everybody by the end of the season, or by the time playoffs comes around, almost everybody's playing through some type of ailment, right? Like it becomes about pain tolerance and about playing through pain and whether or not you can manage said pain. Because there's a difference between playing through pain and playing while injured or playing hurt. And throughout the majority of an NBA season, you're going to have lots of little dings and bruises and knacks and, injuries or whatever. And it's about whether or not you get cleared from a medical staff and whether you can play through it without doing any further damage. And then it becomes about the pain tolerance. So for all three of these guys, at four of them actually, it's just the Rockets are, trying to make sure that they do their due diligence. They don't want to exacerbate anything, especially with a guy like Fred, like you pointed out. The minutes burden, it's not, anything new to him. Fred has played, a ton of minutes throughout his entire career to this point, played a ton of minutes for Nick Nurse. He was a guy that was always, top 5, top 10 in the league in minutes per game. But at this point in his career, on the other side of 30, and for what the Rockets need out of him, I do think there's a reason why we're seeing some reported interest and some rumors about the Rockets maybe looking into some of these available guards on the marketplace, that kind of thing, because they need a guy who can maybe take a little bit of the burden off of Fred, because they don't really have another great offensive initiator for this team, unfortunately, because of some of the lack of success from Jalen Green here in year 3, the immense burden placed on Fred. It's basically, and Madison Moore highlighted this on our last episode, right? It's Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, and Alperen Sengun are the 3 kind of offensive initiators for this team. Amin Thompson is getting there. He's looking better and more comfortable, but he's still not in a place where you feel incredibly confident and just, hey, give him the rock, let him steer the offense for the entirety of the time that he's on the floor. They're still kind of using him in that pseudo wing role, so they do need some additional support in that regard, which is why we're going to cover a couple of those names, Malcolm Brogdon, D'Angelo Russell, as some possibilities here in just a moment. And the other guy we got to talk about here in just a moment is Jalen Green, with a report coming out that the Rockets are committed to his role on a winning team. So we're going to unpack what that means for this Rockets team and for Jalen Green here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Hungryroot. Trying to eat a little healthier in 2024? Hungryroot is here to rescue you from the short-lived resolutions by making meal planning easy and nutritious. Build healthy habits that won't disappear by February with Hungryroot. Hungryroot is the easiest way to get fresh, high-quality food delivered right to your doorstep. They've got healthy groceries and simple recipes all in one place. Hungryroot will recommend recipes and groceries based on your tastes. Take their suggestions or choose anything you want. They've got fresh produce, high-quality meat and seafood, pantry staples, healthy snacks and sweets, and so much more. The best part is Hungryroot follows a simple standard. It's gotta taste good, be quick to make, and contain whole, trusted ingredients. Right now, Hungryroot is offering Locked On Rockets listeners 40% off your first delivery and free veggies for life. Just go to hungryroot.com/lockedon to get 40% off your first delivery and claim your free veggies. That's hungryroot.com/lockedon. Don't forget to use our link so that they know that we sent you. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, it is worth noting, Ben, as we get into this, kind of topic change over to Jalen Green. Jalen did not practice Tuesday afternoon with the Rockets due to an illness. So we're not sure the severity of said illness, but it was enough to at least hold him out of Rockets practice. So TBD on whether or not he'll be available for the game against the Portland Trailblazers Wednesday evening. But the report that we're referencing here is by fellow Locked On host Matt Moore, host of Locked On Nuggets, Locked On NBA, and he is a reporter for the Action Network, and he's an incredibly plugged-in guy. And he did a recent article kind of highlighting little news and notes, things that he's hearing from around the league. And at least as far as what he's heard about the Houston Rockets, is that the team remains committed to Jalen Green. And I highlighted this about 2 weeks ago, 2-3 weeks ago on the show. It tracks with what I've understood as well, that they don't have this, they don't feel a pressing need or desire to shake things up. They don't have this, let's put it this way. They're not reading Rockets Twitter every day thinking that they have to make a drastic sweeping change to this team. And I respect and understand the decision to want to stay committed to Jalen Green, but at the same time, if you read between the lines there a little bit, it doesn't necessarily say, oh, they want to stay committed to Jalen Green, in a starting capacity role, but they want to stay committed to Jalen Green on a winning team.
Key word is finding his role, which indicates that they don't yet know what that role is going to be. And with that caveat, I'm completely understanding of it and on board, because I don't think it's really the time to trade Jalen Green. Yeah. Because at this point, if you're moving on from him in year 3, it's not like his value is going to be all that high. Basically, I don't see the delta and trading the delta between trading Jalen Green at the 2024 deadline versus trading him in the 2024 offseason or all the way up to the 2025 deadline being so great that it's not worth the upside of keeping him and hoping that he eventually finds that role, be it starting, 6-man, whatever it may be, and finds a way to contribute to a winning team. We know that's still a work in progress, but he's someone who's still 21 years old. There is at least some precedent for a guy of his age. Guards do tend to take a little bit longer for a number of reasons. So for me, if you traded him now, I just don't see what you could get that would trump the upside of simply keeping him around and hoping that, be it in this role or some other role, he eventually finds out a way to contribute. Because I think at this point, if you trade him at this deadline, you're selling low. And so I just don't think the timing is right. So with that in mind, from a value perspective.
Before we transition, just because on that note, I'm kind of the opposite belief, actually, where I think I understand the desire and the wanting to be committed to Jalen and hoping that he can find his role here in Houston. I get that. And if that's what the team wants to do, if they are open to the idea of exploring other possibilities with Jalen, i.e., right, bringing him off the bench, whatever, changing up his role a little bit, maybe you make him more of a primary facilitator coming off the bench, who knows, right? Just changing up his role on this team, whatever that may look like. If they're open to that experimentation process, and if Jalen is receptive to that and receptive to accepting a new role and trying to find some type of a winning role for himself here in Houston, then I'm all for it. Hold on to him throughout the lifetime of his current contract, right? He's on a team-friendly deal. You don't have to worry about a rookie scale extension. You could let him go to restricted free agency at the end of next season, and if somebody makes you pay through the nose for him, then that's probably a good thing, because then that means that he hit and somebody felt good enough about his production to want to pay him in the first place. This is kind of the same argument that we had about Kevin Porter Jr. back when we were debating, do you extend him? Do you not, right? Do you try to lock him down on a team-friendly deal? Whatever. But my thing is, I think there's still some inherent like just value in Jaylen for a team that might look at them and think, you know what? The Rockets are not utilizing him properly, right? Change of scenery. We could put him in a better spot. We could give him the ball, do something different, right? To where I still think there's a little bit of like you could trade on his potential possibility right now at the deadline. Whereas I think if you get to the end of year 3, and if year 3 is more or less the same of what it's been, some incredibly high highs, a lot of lows, a lot of pendulum swinging back and forth, some inconsistency. If it's just a lot more of that for the rest of the season, then I think you get to, he's 3 years in, it's the off season. At that point, I think you lose the ability to trade on any remaining potential that he has. So I do think there's a little bit more value if you were to look to trade him now. But I do agree with you. I don't think it's the right move to trade him at this deadline at this point.
The key word is little. I do agree that the longer you hold on to him, the more the potential starts to, I guess, decrease in terms of how much value there is there to another team. But I just think that's dwarfed by the potential upside if things actually do click for Jaylen at the level that we expected a couple of years ago. So while it's not that there's no impact from waiting, to me, it's a good gamble to wait. Because what you would lose in terms of his trade value, what you conceivably could move him for now, to me, that's more than offset by the upside of what if he actually does click, be it in this role or some other role. I just think there's much more value, and in an NBA where you have to think upside, to me, the upside path is staying the course, at least with Jaylen the player. Now, perhaps Jaylen the role eventually changes, as Matt sort of left some wiggle room for, but I just think staying the course with Jaylen the player and his talent gives you more potential upside than whatever you could fetch for him at this deadline if you were just hell-bent on moving him no matter what.
Now, I think one of the interesting parallels that was drawn is you can look at a guy like Markelle Fultz, who kind of, is a very similar situation to Jalen Green, where he was drafted, top draft pick, didn't quite pan out immediately, but took a little bit longer and then eventually found his role, but with a different situation, with a different team, all that. And I do think that for Jaylen, it doesn't necessarily have to be a different team, but I do think the Rockets are going to have to adjust their expectations for him and adjust maybe his role. And that's where some of, my previous conversation, and discussion about the idea of moving Jaylen to a bench role, right? Making him your de facto sixth man, I guess. That's where some of that comes from, is just a change of scenery is sometimes all it takes for a player. Is sometimes you just need something to change. And it feels like at this point, the Rockets have kind of exhausted almost every different approach in the book that I can think of when you're utilizing him as a starter, right? They've had him playing off ball. They have had him give him more on ball reps. They've had him play more 2-man game with Alperen and Sengun. They've had him sub out early and then come back to run the bench unit. They basically tried every which way to try and get Jaylen going with the starters that I can think of, or at least that Ime can think of at this point. So,
well, the other big domino that I think is going to prompt some changes, be it to the starting lineup or just the rotations, is the fact that Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore are getting much more consistent. Because while Jaylen's had these issues throughout the first half of the season, number one, it was a small sample size to start the season. And secondly, there was always the question of who's the alternative. Even if Reggie Bullock in certain matchups might be a little steadier than Jaylen, it just wasn't worth it in a season where you're not trying to contend for a title anyway to give those reps to a 32-year-old Reggie Bullock instead of Jaylen Green. Now that you're getting to a point where Amen and Cam are playing well enough to warrant playing time for a team that's competitive, then all of a sudden you can argue that, hey, if Jaylen's having a bad night, then maybe inserting Amen or Cam into that role, that has the upside to justify a change and to justify taking away reps from Jaylen. Not saying it's going to happen with the starting lineup just yet. The sample with Amen and Cam is still small. They are rookies. They are inconsistent. But just the fact that they're there and just the fact that some nights they're good enough to play at a clear rotation level, the fact that we are seeing these flashes, that does change the calculus, in my opinion, to where the bar for Jaylen is a lot higher than it's been, I would say, the first couple of months of the year when Amen and Cam weren't doing much at all. Cam was in the G League, and the only realistic alternative was Reggie Bullock. It's different now that you do have high ceiling alternatives to where it's not worth it if you're playing a veteran, if you're giving those reps to Jaylen to someone who doesn't have a high ceiling for a team that's not trying to contend anyway. But it is worth it if you're giving those reps to Amen or Cam if they're playing well. And so that's going to change the dynamic in and of itself.
And the other domino that will also change the dynamic, maybe even more so than, Amen and Cam and their progress, is the return of Tari Eason. At some point, whenever that may be, whenever the ramp eventually starts to level out and he gets back to a place where he can actually consistently play again and he's healthy, then then the Rockets are going to be faced with that really tough question of, hey, Tari's one of your best 5 players, and there's a really strong argument for him to be put into that starting lineup, especially if the struggles continue for a guy like Jalen Green. And again, because then you don't feel bad about it, because you're not only you're putting a better player out there, but you're putting a player out there who is also a young player that you're giving those, that developmental runway to, essentially, instead of like the analogy you use, right? A 32-year-old Reggie Bullock. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Rockets navigate the situation with Jalen Green in the coming, weeks and months as we navigate the rest of this season, because we got to get past the trade deadline first. And again, I don't think that my gut is telling me the Rockets don't make a major move with any of their young pieces ahead of this deadline. But at the same time, you never say never, because even though we've got, there's reporters, you've got ears to the ground, and everybody's trying to be plugged in and get a little scoop or a little tidbit here and there. At the end of the day, NBA GMs and front offices are largely unpredictable, because you can have promises be made. You can say, hey, we're not trading you. This isn't happening, X, Y, Z, whatever. And then you get presented with an offer that you can't resist. And, if a team comes knocking and says, hey, we've got this offer and we really want to, maybe the Brooklyn Nets come asking for their picks back or something, because they're desperate to be able to actually bottom out successfully, because they're bottoming out without control of their draft capital right now, and that looks like a complete dumpster fire. So maybe they come knocking and they're like, hey, we want to get those picks back, and maybe Mikal Bridges and some of our picks, and Jaylen Green, throw that in there, something like that, some kind of type of trade centered around those parts could be in the works. You never know at this point, but couple trades that we do want to potentially talk about here. A couple names for the Rockets to monitor: Malcolm Brogdon and D'Angelo Russell. We're going to talk about those guys coming up here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL postseason is fully underway, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in your pocket in bonus bets, win or lose. And all you have to do is wager $5. It's that simple. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get in on the NFL postseason action right now. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, a couple names that are some really interesting names here, one of which that we brought up way early on this season, Malcolm Brogdon, in the immediate aftermath of the Damian Lillard, Drew Holiday, shuffle, scuttlebutt, whatever, at the beginning of the season. When Malcolm Brogdon was stranded in Portland, we brought up his name as a possibility for the Houston Rockets to target when they were looking to originally move the Kevin Porter Jr. contract, because they knew that they were going to need to kind of fill that quota, fill that role on the bench, that dynamic, scoring guard, playmaking capabilities, whatever, off the bench. Because like it or not, Kevin Porter Jr. was a part of this team's vision this season. And when they lost him due to the off-the-court stuff, it left a hole in this Rockets roster that they have yet to actually properly fill. So I really like Malcolm Brogdon. It always just becomes a question of what would be the price point for the Blazers to move on from him. It's not like the Blazers are in contention. They're a bad team, so clearly you just give them some draft capital and they'll be happy with it. But it comes down to how many other teams are bidding for his services, and then how far are you willing to go? How much do you feel like you need a guy like Malcolm Brogdon? At least right now, the messaging from the Rockets organization is they don't feel like they need to make a move ahead of this deadline. If there's one available that they feel is good, then they will pull the trigger on it, but they don't feel pressed like they have to do something.
Yeah, that's the sense that I've gotten as well. And it goes back to this balance that we've talked about throughout this season of trying to win now, but not prohibiting your ability to win bigger in the future. You want to be able to take bigger swings, both in terms of the guys you're trying to develop, who you're giving certain reps to. We talked about that in regards to Jalen Green and why it makes sense to potentially take away some of his reps from Thompson or Cam Whitmore in a way that it wouldn't if it was Reggie Bullock. But it also comes down to what and when what they're willing to trade and when they're willing to do it. And the way it's interesting with regards to this trade deadline, with Malcolm Brogdon, who's under contract for another year, my guess is that Portland's going to want a first-round pick. And I don't know if it makes sense for the Rockets to give that up for a guy who's already on the other side of 30, especially when the lottery has not happened yet. That's when, for me, with this Brooklyn pick in particular, you can certainly make an argument from an asset perspective that maybe the Rockets should look, be it now or this offseason, to turn that Brooklyn pick into a veteran player, because you already have so many young guys as it is. And if you don't have a plan to play and develop whatever young guy you would draft in the top 10, then that asset is just going to depreciate in value.
I'm laughing because I literally just made this exact point last episode with Madison. So it's just funny because I'm like, yeah, we're on the same wavelength. Yeah. Good. Okay.
But there is value in what is now a 26% chance at that pick landing in the top 4, because even though the 2024 draft is perceived as weak, all it takes is one. I think back to 2020. 2020 was supposed to be a pretty weak draft class, and by and large it was, but Anthony Edwards ended up being one of the 4 going. I know he was number 1, but going into the draft, it wasn't even certainty he'd go number 1 overall. And even though largely it was a disappointing draft class, he's been probably the best drafted NBA player this decade. So if you have a chance to get that high in the order, even in a weak draft class, that's not an insignificant variable. And yet, if you were to trade the Brooklyn pick at this year's deadline, I don't think people would really consider it as a likely top 4 pick. They would be treating it as something in the 8 to 10 range. So to me, there's not that much upside to forcing a deal now involving that pick, when if you wait until the offseason, you will at least have lottery night to see if you get lucky, to see if that what is now a 26% chance kicks in, and maybe you get a premium asset out of that. And then if it ends up going back to the 8 through 10 range, then, it has basically the same value that I think it does on the market right now. So if that is your trade asset, while I would be open to using it in certain deals, I would prefer to make a marginal upgrade without using it. And that's why I've sort of come around on this D'Angelo Russell hypothetical, because it sounds like you could probably get Russell for just the expiring contracts for Oladipo and Landale, and perhaps keep your future first round assets for a bigger deal down the line.
And it's worth noting that it would not be this is not a straight up trade with the Los Angeles Lakers. This would be the Rockets getting involved as a third team, which is something we talked about previously. So the Rockets would be a facilitator, because the Lakers are trying to pursue DeJounte Murray from the Atlanta Hawks, and the Hawks do not want to take back D'Angelo Russell is the problem. So at this point, if the Rockets were to be able to get involved, then they have enough matching salary. You float, you send D'Angelo Russell to Houston, you send the expiring contracts wherever they need to go, and then, make all the money line up. And then at that point, what would it cost to get your hands on D'Lo? Because you're actually doing the Hawks and the Lakers a favor by taking him on in the deal. So is that enough to just send back the expiring contracts and you don't have to include any draft capital? Is it, you could even maybe make the argument that they would have to attach potentially a second or something to D'Lo to dump him on the Rockets.
Yeah, and that's something that I've seen on my timeline increasingly the last couple of days. It's been floated as a possibility really ever since the news leak that they're looking for a third team to absorb Russell and help facilitate that deal. And to me, that's a very nuanced situation in which, in a vacuum, would I prefer D'Angelo Russell over Malcolm Brogdon? Absolutely not. However, if we're talking about D'Angelo Russell and keeping the Brooklyn pick versus Malcolm Brogdon and losing the Brooklyn pick, or losing some other first-round pick, which beyond the pick itself also potentially puts you in a tough spot when it comes to the Stepien rule with any big trade offers down the line, then I would probably prefer Russell, a more moderate upgrade, simply because of the flexibility it gives you down the line to make bigger moves. And that's where the Rockets are trying to sort of pull off this intricate dance of helping the team in the short term, plugging that Kevin Porter Jr. hole, while still giving yourself long-term upside when it comes to team building.
I think Malcolm Brogdon is easily the better fit between the two players. I think that he is a more complementary piece. He's better. He fits the identity of the team better. He's a significantly better defender. More of that true kind of combo guard where you feel comfortable playing him at the 1 or the 2. Whereas D'Lo, he's a guy that, at times he's kind of a rhythm guy. He struggles a little bit if he's in a strictly spot up shooter role, I think. So I would definitely lean Malcolm Brogdon between those two, but to the point, as you already highlighted, if you can get D'Lo for essentially what is for free, or even getting an asset back for taking him on, then that is the value play that I think the Rockets would be stupid to not take a look at, frankly. But I will say that there's an interesting avenue here where you look at the Rockets roster and who they've got available. And if this roster was completely healthy right now, if Tari was good, if everybody was good, they've got kind of a logjam, at the wing spot at this point. And sure. I think the odd man out at this point is probably Jae'Sean Tate. And Jae'Sean Tate is still a guy who has, I think, a decent amount of value around the league, like in league circles. So. Teams are really high on what Jae'Sean Tate can bring to the table. So you could maybe flip Jae'Sean Tate to another team, to a contender, for what would effectively be like a late first kind of thing in this upcoming 2024 draft. And if you could facilitate it where you flip Jae'Sean Tate, get the asset back, and then package that asset with the expiring contracts, then maybe you can get away with making a move for a Malcolm Brogdon type without having to cave and utilize that Brooklyn Nets pick.
Yeah, I agree that Rafael Stone should be leaving no stone unturned. Pardon the
Lord
pun.
Have mercy.
Oh my.
Trying to be creative and seeing if there's a way you can get the better player. But I will say, beyond the asset part of that equation, it's also worth noting that you can carve out minutes for an upgrade without necessarily taking away many from the prospects you're trying to develop. I've seen a lot of talk that, well, is it worth bringing in anyone, because you'd then potentially be taking away minutes from, if not Jalen Green, then Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore, these guys off the bench. Not necessarily. I mean, if you're talking about adding 2 or 3 people, then maybe. But if we're talking about just 1 or 2, then you can subtract from Aaron Holiday, Jae'Sean Tate.
So
Jeff Green
subtract
is someone,
a little bit from Fred, because he's been playing too many minutes.
There you go. Yeah. So I don't think it's quite as simple as saying that, well, you have to choose between your young prospects and bringing in someone else. No, there's ways you can bring in at least 1 and maybe 2 and put them in your rotation without making it impossible to give consistent minutes to the young prospects that you're also trying to develop. I do think it's possible you can do both.
Who do you think would be a better fit on this Rockets roster, Malcolm Brogdon or D'Angelo Russell? Let us know in the YouTube comments. If you're listening, if you're watching on YouTube, let us know your thoughts in the YouTube comments. Ben, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at.
Yep, Ben DuBose on Twitter, the Logger Line on Twitter, the Rockets Wire on Twitter/X, and rocketswire.usatoday.com for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Give us your thoughts on everything we talked about in today's episode in the YouTube comments. That's the best way to help out the show. Drop a comment. Remember, for the house, for the team, for the algorithm. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.